What's up, everybody? It's Man of Low Moral Fiber here. My name's Luke, and in this video, we're going to be taking another look at the Hawkeye as a part of my Does It Suck series. The Hawkeye is a Seraph rarity Jakobs sniper rifle that is available as a part of the third campaign DLC, Sir Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt. In Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, it only drops from Voracidous the Invincible, who most people consider to be the most difficult raid boss in Borderlands 2, and I count myself among that group. That makes this weapon a little bit difficult to farm. Like a lot of other weapons, though, it did receive a significant buff as a part of the community patch, and that's why we're going to be taking another look at it. We're going to start here by looking at the unpatched version of the weapon, then probably go to Sanctuary to do some damage comparisons, then apply the community patch, do some further damage comparisons, and then play around with the patched version of the weapon, which should be a lot better. Which is going to be quite interesting because this is obviously not a bad weapon to begin with. If we compare it, though, to a similarly built Jakobs sniper rifle here that is called a Amok Amok. These are both going to have the base damage accessory, a dull scope, and a Jakobs grip. We can see that the Hawkeye is going to have a significantly decreased base damage. A lot of the other stats are pretty comparable. The Hawkeye does have a better magazine size, it has a better reload speed, the accuracy is negligibly different, and it also has a better fire rate. Now, the better fire rate is pretty important on the Hawkeye because compared to most Jakobs sniper rifles, the Hawkeye has a very low recoil. If we shoot the Hawkeye here, and we'll just kind of shoot here in the middle of this bar, we can see that it bounces up a little bit, but it doesn't bounce up too high. And so that's kind of cool, and then if you really start firing fast, the recoil is quite manageable. Now, if you switch over to a Jakobs Amok Amok, you can see that it jumps up much higher between each shot. And so that actually allows you to make use of the increased fire rate here on the on the Hawkeye, with its decreased recoil as compared to a normal Jakobs sniper. Most Jakobs snipers, we can test the Skull Masher here as well, are going to have that significantly increased recoil instead of what the Hawkeye has. And so that makes the Hawkeye pretty unique in that regard compared to other Jakobs sniper rifles and a little bit easier to use. Now, beyond that, the base damage on the Hawkeye is significantly lower than the Amok Amok, but it has a significantly increased critical hit damage modifier. So we'll have to do some damage testing to kind of see how that works out with Zero's skill tree. Zero obviously already has a lot of buffs to critical hit damage through skills like Headshot, Killer, and Critical Ascension. So with that in mind, maybe this super high critical hit damage modifier may result in diminishing returns. We'll have to test that out. Now, beyond that, we can also see that the Hawkeye has a very increased weapon zoom, even though it has the same scope as both of these two Jakobs snipers here. We can see that they all have the dull scope, and whereas the Amok Amok and the Skull Masher both have 4.8 weapon zoom, the Hawkeye is going to have 8 weapon zoom. And so with that in mind, you're probably going to want a Hawkeye with a low power scope because it's always going to increase the power of that zoom. So let's get started here in the Washburn refinery for just a minute, and we'll see how we do. Now, with that low recoil, you can really roll off some critical hits pretty quickly, which is kind of cool. Go ahead and get most of these guys kunai'd and slagged and try to get some critical hits on them. Perfect. So you can see that this weapon is plenty potent. There's no doubt about that. This is a weapon that definitely didn't suck before the community patch, but for a number of reasons was a better weapon on other characters, especially Maya, in my opinion, than it is on Zero. Now, the huge critical hit damage modifier is something that makes this weapon a better Jakobs sniper rifle with the B than a lot of other Jakobs sniper rifles, but we'll get to that when we get to Sanctuary, basically, and do some testing on the testing dummy. Basically, the lower base damage on this weapon is something that affects Zero more than it affects other characters because Zero already has ways to increase the critical hit damage modifier, and because of that, he's not really in need of a huge critical hit damage modifier and benefits more from base damage, especially once you have higher amounts of critical ascension. You can see that I do have 24 stacks of critical ascension at this point, or actually more than that now, and it's still taking a few shots to wear into some of these enemies and actually disable them. So that's 2 shots there when we had Now we have 30 critical ascension, and that guy actually survived that shot. So There's something a little bit weird about the way the Hawkeye's damage scales with Critical Ascension, and like I said, when we get to the Sanctuary testing dummy, we'll take a look at that. But the community patch is going to add base damage to this weapon, and it may make it much more effective with Zero, so we'll have to test that out. I'm kind of excited about it because I did not know until very recently that this weapon had such a decreased recoil, and that's something that a lot of Jakobs sniper rifles can be a little bit difficult to use as a result of that. So, it's pretty cool. Let's go to Sanctuary. Oh, missed our jump there. Now, the way Critical Ascension scales is it adds to both base damage and critical hit damage for every stack that you get. I believe it's 5% and 6%. Let's check on that. Yeah, so 5% extra base damage, 6% extra critical hit damage per stack there. And so when you're starting with a lower base damage, you end up getting a much lower effective damage from the Critical Ascension, basically. And so I think to start, like with our first shot, it's going to be very comparable between the Amok Amok and the Hawkeye. But then as we begin to work up Critical Ascension, the Hawkeye starts to lag behind the Amok Amok and other Jakobs sniper rifles significantly. So our first shot here, we do not have one shot, one kill with the Hawkeye. Going to be 5970. That is the loudest train I've heard in a little while. And then with the Amok Amok, it's going to be 6785. So you can see that the Hawkeye is just, even though it has this huge critical hit damage modifier, doing way less damage than the Amok Amok. Now, if you wear a B shield, for example, that is definitely not going to be the case. The Hawkeye excels with the B shield. You can see we got 18.6 million there, and then if we switch over to the Amok Amok, we're going to get only 12.3 million, or 12.4 if we round up. So the Hawkeye is definitely one of the better Jakobs sniper rifles to use with the B. The Godfinger can also be really devastating with the B, though, if you're far enough away from the enemy, because you will get the multiple pellet abuse. But the Hawkeye at an intermediate range is going to be the best Jakobs sniper rifle to use with the B. And that's pretty interesting, and it makes this weapon one of the best sniper rifles on Maya, in my opinion. But here we're testing it on Zero. It's always been a good weapon on Maya. We're trying to see how much it has improved on Zero here. And obviously it will have improved on Maya quite a bit as well. So let's go ahead, work up some Critical Ascension real quick, and then take a look at how this weapon performs after we've worked up that amount of Critical Ascension. Just looking for my crit machine here. There we go. Then we'll go buy a little bit of ammo. Cool. Alright. Still have that B shield on, so we'll need to take that off. Alright. So now we'll just go ahead and wear into him here using the Vladoff, and we'll work up to an amount of Critical Ascension. Alright, so 37 stacks of Critical Ascension. If we shoot with the Hawkeye, it's going to be at 17 million there. And if we shoot with the Amok Amok, once it drops back down to 37, you can see that the damage on the Amok Amok is much increased. And so that's why I've always thought that the Hawkeye was a little underwhelming with Zero, because it did not pair well with Critical Ascension, basically. Critical Ascension is something that is obviously going to be very dependent on your initial base damage, and that's why the Amok Amok and other Jakobs sniper rifles will really start to outpace the Hawkeye once you have basically any amount of Critical Ascension. And they're a little bit better than the Hawkeye to begin with, if you're not using the B at least. So the Hawkeye, it was something that was always a little bit underwhelming on Zero, especially considering that it has to be farmed from Voracidous in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, who is the most difficult raid boss in the game. So let's go ahead, quit out, and apply the community patch, and then see how the weapon is improved. Its damage before we apply this community patch is approximately 570,000. The community patch says that it's going to get a damage buff of 58%. Keep in mind, I already had a base damage accessory on that weapon, so it's not going to be exactly 58% higher than the weapon just had, but it should still be significantly higher. So we went from 570k approximately to, ooh, and it got a new skin here, 802k. So that's going to be a significant base damage increase there for us, but the Amok Amok has gotten better as well. So even though the Hawkeyes got better, did it get better than its competition? I'm not entirely certain, because the Skull Masher was also increased. The Hawkeye was also, or not the Hawkeye, the Godfinger as well was buffed. So basically all of its contemporary competition, the Amok Amok, the Skull Masher, and the Godfinger all got buffs as well. So even though the Hawkeye got a buff and it's got a cool new skin, is it going to be enough to beat out the buffs that the other Jakobs weapons got? I'm not entirely certain. So we'll get rid of one shot, one kill there, and we can see it went to about 10 million a shot there. Wait for that critical ascension stack to go away. That was weird. Inconsistent damage there. Alright, we'll shoot it again. I think that's right now. So the 8.4 million there. And then we switch on over to the Amok Amok, get rid of one shot, one kill. Wow! The Hawkeye is actually outdoing the Amok Amok on the initial shot now. 8.4 million. And then the Amok Amok, make that critical ascension stat go away. Hopefully. There we go. 7.3 million. So the Hawkeye got a significant buff. That is pretty interesting there. Let's go ahead and work up some critical ascension and see what happens. Alright, 37 stacks. It's going to be 24 million there. And then the Amok Amok is going to be, as soon as the stack ticks down, 25 million. So again, with the Hawkeye, 24 million. And then the Amok Amok is going to be, with this relatively significant amount of critical ascension, about 26 million. So now the Hawkeye scales much better with critical ascension as compared to the Amok Amok than it was doing before, because it has that significant increase to base damage, which can be further amplified by critical ascension. So that's quite interesting there, and I'm very interested to see how the weapon performs, because it still has that ridiculously minor recoil. So that's pretty cool, and that's one of the reasons why I may end up needing to farm for this weapon now on my farming character, which I'm not especially excited about because Voracidous is a very difficult farm. Now, that the Hawkeye is pretty good, Voracidous is a pretty solid area to farm, because the two weapons that Voracidous drops, the Hawkeye and the Interfacer, well, the Interfacer was always a top tier weapon, and it seems like the Hawkeye is going to be a top tier weapon now with a very unique skin. I kind of like how it has this, I guess you would call it iridescence or glowing parts to it that a elemental weapon would normally have, but because this is non-elemental, it's just showing up as white here. I think that that skin is pretty damn cool, and then I like the way that this all looks like, you know, some case-hardened metal or something that's going on as far as the receiver here, so that's pretty neat. Let's go ahead and get started. I think that it's going to deal significantly more damage now, and then keep in mind that critical ascension is going to be much easier to maintain now that the critical ascension stacks last a little bit longer. So that's going to be one of the things that significantly benefits this weapon as well, but that's going to benefit all snipers here with the community patch. If you don't miss your shots at least, this weapon has no problem disabling loaders, which is pretty cool. A little bit of trouble shooting through a bull loader shield sometimes, if you won't move it at least. Cool. I was trying to shoot this guy quick enough that the exploder would still come around the corner and I would be able to get that critical ascension stack off of him, but I really needed to kill that bull loader because he had been alive for a long time and he was just too damn close to us. So now that this weapon actually performs a lot better with critical ascension, it's going to be a very powerful weapon. And I'm excited that this weapon did receive a buff because, like I said, I already thought it was one of the best sniper rifles on Maya, who I actually find pretty fun to snipe with. With a B shield and phase lock, you can really, stay very far back from enemies with this weapon, especially with its increased zoom as well, and really, really benefit from the B shield boost and the Hawkeye huge critical hit damage. It makes this weapon significantly devastating on Maya, and before I kind of found my Trickster playstyle on Maya. That was one of my favorite playstyles with Maya. This obviously isn't a super solid weapon for chain reaction because your chain reaction shots can't be guaranteed to actually hit critical hits on enemies, and so that makes this weapon a little bit lackluster with chain reaction on Maya. But that's not a huge deal because it's going to one-hit a lot of the enemies that you phase lock when you're wearing the B shield. And this weapon is absolutely devastating with the B shield even before the community patch, and without the community patch it's even going to be more devastating. Didn't realize that guy had got that close to me. That was a mistake there. We should be able to build up a little bit of critical ascension on these guys, which is cool. One more guy here. Perfect. Now we'll be to actual gun enemies, and we'll see what we do against them. We have a rather impressive amount of critical ascension now at 50, basically, and that's going to allow us to work through these enemies pretty quickly. Now, I do think once we continue to climb in critical ascension, the Amok Amok will eventually outpace the Hawkeye, but it takes much more critical ascension to outpace the Hawkeye than it did prior, which it basically took 0 before the community patch, and every amount of critical ascension that you had after that was only going to make it further outpace it. Now you actually need a decent amount of critical ascension for the Amok Amok to outdamage the Hawkeye, which is really impressive for the Hawkeye. Now, the Godfinger also got a buff, and the Godfinger is going to get B abuse, basically, because it has unlisted projectiles. So the weapon's B supremacy may have been a little bit mitigated, but it's still going to be a very strong weapon, and if you're relatively close to an enemy, it might still be, or it will still be more powerful than the Godfinger at first, but as you begin to get further away from an enemy, the Godfinger is going to reign supreme, with or without the B shield. So that's kind of an interesting trade-off there. It might be interesting to play a Hawkeye and Godfinger-based Maya with the B shield at this point. May have to look at that one day. That was a playstyle I really used to enjoy. And I'm not usually a total fan of the B shield, but like I said, I thought it was an interesting sniping playstyle on Maya. Cool. So as we work through here, you can see that the Hawkeye's new buff is awesome. I think that the buff to the skin is something that is kind of drawing me to farm the weapon real quick, or at the moment at least, which is a little bit worrying because Voracidous can be a very difficult weapon, or a very difficult enemy to farm weapons from. But if we stack critical ascension prior to fighting him, we should be able to blow him up a couple times in a row, so hopefully that would work out well for us. We'll work through Pervy's room here. Pervy's basically one big critical hit, so not too hard to finish him off with a sniper. At least most snipers. Any good ones, that is. Where is this guy? Are there any more? There's one more. Oh, it's the same guy. Alright. So we are going to end up breaking 100 stacks of critical ascension most likely as we run through here, which is kind of fun. Depends on how many we get off Hurley, basically, because they are going to tick down a little bit before we get there. I don't know, maybe we won't get to 100. Maybe it'll tick down too far. I'll try not to slag these dudes so that we can actually get some critical hits. Hey, there we go. 100 stacks right there, and then we'll probably get back up to that after this cutscene. I'm not entirely certain. So that's pretty cool. The Hawkeye is now a much better weapon with all characters than it is prior to the community patch, but especially with 0, the Hawkeye has now moved into the probably better than Amok Amok territory, which I didn't believe that it was beforehand. Quit moving me. Alright, so we'll take out his arms. He basically can't deal any damage to us now. Let's take a look real quick. So Amok Amok on a critical hit here is going to be doing, assuming we can actually hit it. We can't. So his eye spot is really small, and then his hip joints are difficult to deal with as well. So let's try real quick to get a critical hit with this Amok Amok here. So that's going to be at 46 mil, and then the Hawkeye is going to be at 36. So once you do have enough critical ascension, a Amok Amok will eventually become more powerful than the Hawkeye still, just like it did before the community patch. But you need a lot more critical ascension for that to happen now. Go ahead and see what he dropped here. Didn't look like he dropped any of his DLC items, so we'll move forward. Weird that he didn't choose to fire his machine guns at all and was just trying to barrel us to death. That was a poor move on his part. I will also say that ambush is another skill that seems to work out better for higher base damage weapons than it was for the lower base damage that this weapon was working off of. Or, excuse me, this weapon. I might have killed those two dudes with the wrong weapon there. But for the most part, we were working through with the Hawkeye. And the Hawkeye performed very, very admirably. It's much better now than it was prior to. That's actually a decent explosive relic there. You can see that a max explosive relic is probably going to be around 39%, so that's actually a pretty good explosive relic. So the Hawkeye, it didn't suck beforehand, but it was kind of sucky to use on Zero just because pretty much every top tier Jakobs sniper rifle was going to outclass it. Now that's definitely not the case. It has its merits, and one of the neatest things about this weapon is its severely decreased recoil, which doesn't really show up if you're doing theoretical DPS comparisons, but it makes the weapon significantly easier to use, especially in the heat of battle. And that's something that kind of, in combination with this skin right now, is making me think, oh man, we've got to farm Voracidous, which I'm not super stoked about because, like I said, he's a very difficult raid boss. But I am stoked about the increase in damage here on the Hawkeye because, like I said, I always like the weapon on Maya, and I like that it's just another sniper rifle that Zero can wield super efficiently now. He's the master of snipers, and, you know, he should be good with them all. So, with that in mind, I like the Hawkeye's buff quite a bit, and I really love the new skin that it got. Like I said, I really love these glowing parts to it, so that's really cool there. As always, guys, thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you haven't yet taken the time to subscribe, please do so. I'd appreciate that as well. The Hawkeye didn't really suck beforehand. It definitely does not suck now, so I'm pretty stoked about it. As always, guys, one more time, thanks for watching, and I do hope to catch you next time. Bye, guys.